Hello, I'm Jim Self. I have a really wonderful job in life. I have the opportunity to participate in a program called Mastering Alchemy. And what's interesting about this program, Mastering Alchemy, it really is how things work, how everything works. It begins to have a lot of information about where did we come from and how do we go from where we came from to where we're going. So it's a very fascinating opportunity I get to play in. The opportunity is fascinating also because the playmates that I have in this whole process of mastering alchemy are the Ark Angelics, the Ascended Masters, the Lords of Light, all of these beings that play in consciousness in places that we just don't have any awareness of. You know, what I want to do in this conversation is talk about something called the fall of consciousness. And the fall of consciousness is something that's actually quite useful to know about. It's not so much a truth or something that's false. It's not so much of a construct that we believe, because in real terms, sitting here, we have no idea. I mean, like, no idea whether or not the stories of the fall of consciousness ever happened or didn't happen, are real or not real, true or false. But the value of a story is it allows you to create a perspective, an alternate point of reference. Many times it presents a concept that allows you to step back and put pieces of things together in ways that you never even considered before. So the purpose of this conversation is, what is the fall of consciousness? Now, I have a unique opportunity to kind of talk about it because until recently, in the last few years, I had no idea what the fall of consciousness was. My structuring of conversation about something like the fall of consciousness in spiritual terms was purely structured in religion. And the religions, we'll talk about in a few minutes, were really clear that, you know, there's a war and there was a bad angel and on and on and on, all of this huge story. But in my reference points, I get to hear the story from the Ark Angelics. And so this has really been an evolution in my development, my awareness, because it's been something that started out with Archangel Youre, and Raphael and Zadkiel and Metatron have all added pieces to this story. And it's a story, but it's quite a fascinating story. And from my point of view, when you start to put the pieces of the story together, you get to begin to have a point of reference that opens up opportunities, possibilities, concepts that you've actually never even considered. So one of the things about this whole aspect of creation is everything is in motion. Everything's in motion. Everything has a vibration to it. Everything has a spinning effect to it. It's really very much like when you look at a vortex being maybe a hurricane, and you watch this huge spinning vortex. And the thing about vortexes that are really interesting is they're in motion. And if they're spinning one way, they kind of lock things down. And if they're spinning another way, they open things up. And so in this process of consciousness, everything spins. Everything's in vibration. Everything is in these cycles where they are created, they expand, they grow, and then they begin to wither, and then they come to a conclusion. Everything is in that process. But the interesting part about spirit is it really wants to know itself. And in that context of everything that's created by spirit, it comes into being, it's experience that goes out of presence. But spirit, you, never end. You, that concept of being immortal is really very accurate. Although, in the context of, what are you talking about? I have a body, I'm born, and then I die, and that's the end of the game. Well, not so fast. It really isn't the end of the game. So One of the things in this process of this spin, I'll get to the fall of consciousness in a second, is every particle in existence has awareness. Every particle. The rock has awareness. The tree has awareness. You have awareness. Everything has awareness. Now, that doesn't mean it thinks, and it doesn't mean it has great knowledge. It has awareness of itself. And the reason it has awareness of itself is because it wants to know itself. One of the things that happened is in the process of this whole creation, Creator wanted to know itself. And so I'll go on in the story in a minute. As Creator wanted to know itself, it began to move in motion, began to move away from itself, but it began to know itself because there was no away from itself. It just began to know itself. So this whole process of evolution and the Creator wanting to know itself down to the finest particle in existence, in that particle is Creator. Everything is made of the Creator. So in that biblical terms, you're created in the image of Creator. That's not about arms and legs and body parts. That's about consciousness. You have awareness as the Creator has awareness. So as we kind of move through life, though, we all have stories, and this fall of consciousness is a story. But let's take the story down to you, to me, for a moment, because we all have our stories. But the interesting thing about the story is most of the time there is no absolute truth. Oh, it's not right or wrong. And many times the story that we each hold on to define ourselves is a story that says, this is the truth. This is what happened. When I was 6 years old, this happened. But how many times have you said to somebody, remember when we did X? And they said, no, it didn't happen that way. It didn't happen that way. In fact, we didn't do it that way at all. And you think, yeah, I'm absolutely sure we did it that way. The story is your story. But in fact, there are many points of reference to that story. There's many places to observe that story from. And in the process of looking at it, there are many choices in terms of how to utilize the experience of the story. So let's talk about this fall of consciousness, because as it was explained again by these Ark Angelics, it's a fabulous story. But it's not so much now about the fall of consciousness as it is about your evolution out of the fall of consciousness. And this is what we're doing today. This is this whole shift of consciousness we're in, and it's moving extremely fast. We are beginning to become very aware, and yet at the same time, we hold our truths. Oh, this is how it is. This is how it works. But many of you are starting to notice your truths are getting a little more uncomfortable in the body. As you begin to look at the world around you, many of the truths about how things work, not exactly how they may be working today. So let's go back and talk about this fall of consciousness. So as Youre explained it in the beginning of this multiple conversations that we've had, Youre basically said, in the beginning, the Creator wished to know itself in its fullness. And he said, as the Creator explains the story, that there were, let's call them blank spots in consciousness, things that had not been utilized, turned over, unfolded, expanded, known. So the Creator was constantly putting itself into these various aspects of itself, illuminating them, lighting them up, beginning to have experiences with them. But at one point in the experience, the Creator wished to know itself even more fully. And so according to Youre, what the Creator did is it reached into itself and it created these structures that we would call creator gods, little g gods. These are beings, these are aspects of the Creator that had multiple variations of awareness. And in those variations of awareness, they all played in the light of the Creator. They were all part of the Creator. And they were given a blueprint that basically said, here's how you go play the game. Go create. They created universes, planets. They created massive things and all that is. And there is no time on this. One of our distortions is we think we understand time, in which we really don't understand time. Time has many aspects to it, many applications to it, many experiences to it. It's not just past, present, future, and then you die. So as all these great beings went out and played, they were thrilled, according to Youre. And they created and created and created, and it went on for a long time, although no time. But all through this process, there was this different kinds of creation available, using light and sound and color and magnetism and electricity and electromagnetism and adhesion and all these various aspects of light and love, a big aspect of the game. But somehow in the process, the blueprint got frayed, according to Youre. And where it used to say, assemble blocks 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order, somehow the blueprint got misread. Put blocks 4, 1, 3, and 2 together. And over a period of time, you began to get creations that were different. They were all in the light of the Creator, but creations that were starting to be different. And they began to be noticeable over eons. And at some point, according to Youre, the Creator gods were thrilled with the new vibrations of light that they got to play in. And they went and petitioned the Creator for more. And at that point, the Creator expanded the blueprint, gave them a tremendous range of creativity. Part of that range had something we would define as free will. And in the process of a vastly expanded set of opportunities, that aspect of free will gave the creators the ability to create in many new ways. But something began to happen. The creator gods, some of them, many of them, began to get really, really excited about their creations. And it was all in the light. Now, something which I'll touch on at the end of this is, in each one of those creator gods, the ability to create as the Creator creates was part of who they were. And so they created with the light of the Creator, and they also had the capacity to create from their own light. And that was what made them these great beings. Go create in your own image in a lot of ways. So over time, as the story goes, many of these great beings began to create more with the light of themselves than the light of the Creator. And there was really no problem with that, because they were creating wonderful creations. But somehow over time also, these creations, the creator gods began to get really enamored with their creations only. And they began to not use the light of the Creator. And what began to happen was little mutations, little wobbles. It's as if the story began to be perceived from different directions than the story was created. And so this went on for eons again, even though there's no time, but that's the descriptor here. And throughout that process, many of the creator gods also created new creator gods, and those creator gods created new creator gods and new creator gods, etc., and kind of think about it as family and lineage. And so these lineages began to expand and expand, and they knew what the previous lineage knew, just like we do here. And in that process, many of those newer creator gods, if you would, began to create more with the light that they had and less of the light of the Creator. And so these little mutations, little distortions came about, very small at the beginning, but over time, many of the, I'm going to say older creator gods began to notice these little wobbles, these distortions, these mutations, and they began to be somewhat concerned about this. And the way they decided they were going to resolve this is the Creator was going to give them more. And so this is where the Creator started to create variations of these huge, what are called rays of creation, huge configurations of light and love and vibration and, again, electromagnetism and those kind of structures in physics. As they got more, the purpose was to kind of bring everybody back into the fold, if you would, and use the light of the Creator. But over time, the more began to be something that those beings that were using their own light continue to use also. At one point, these are my words, because I don't know how to describe it otherwise, it was as if the Creator said, I'm going to draw a line in the sand. And those that wish to have my light available get to play over here. But those who wish to play in their own light no longer have my light available to them. And according to Uriel and Raphael, many of these great creator gods kind of came right back into and understood what was going on. But there were still some that got very excited about their creation, not trying to defy the Creator, but basically they liked what they were doing. And so consequently, more mutations, more distortions, more wobbles, if you would, began to be ripples throughout creation. Now, if I was to make them related to you and me, these would be vibrations that we would call emotions like anger, fear, judgment, resentment, imposition, slavery, domination, vibrations that were out of alignment with the light. Now, that would be how we would define those, but on a larger level, these were huge distortions. As the whole process of time went on, these distortions began to find their way into multiple layers of consciousness. At the same time, there was a new creation that was created. And this will sound funny to you because you only know this creation. There's no other possibility in lots of ways to the average person. But this creation was known as physicalness. And in physicalness, it was density. It was particles. In non-physicalness, everything is a wave of light. But when you come into physicalness, you create a density that is a particle. And this, according to Metatron, was this fabulous creation. And all these great beings just thoroughly loved this creation. And so you began to create physicalness. Now, in the process of this, there was a number of variations. One of the things that the Creator God also did, or Creator did, was he created many other kinds of beings. And those other kinds of beings were not creator beings. For example, when the Ark Angelics were created and the whole realm of angels were created, the purpose of that grouping of consciousness was to be the audiences of the creator gods. Their job was to go to the great philharmonic, the great operas, the great plays, the great creations, and enjoy themselves. And what a great job that one is. But there were many, many more non-creator beings than creator gods and creator beings. So in the process of these mutations and these distortions and these creations, as they began to play more and more in physicalness, all of these great beings, avatars and all of the other names, one of the things they wanted to do is come and experience themselves as a new awareness of themselves. Know myself, just like the Creator wanted to know itself. And so they would come and they would be a rock, or they would be a tree. They would be density in vibration. Now, way back then, there was no rocks and trees. Density is what was being created. And density is like water vapor. You know, you don't really feel it most of the time, but it's a density. Air is a density. So these early aspects of physicalness were not so much physical as you and I would define physical, but they were physical. And the experiment was, can you make it more dense? And can you make it more dense? And so great creations were happening everywhere, and they would keep taking it into different densities. But as they did that, those mutations, those distortions, those wobbles, in many cases, also made their way into the physical creations. Everything did not experience the fall of consciousness. In fact, the vast majority of all that is doesn't even know about the fall of consciousness, let alone experience it. But in the perspective of all of those that are aware of physicalness in this whole game, the great portion of them never were in the fall of consciousness. And so we, on the other hand, are very much in the fall of consciousness. So one of the things that happened, and I would describe it this way, is it got more dense, more dense. It was like building a really tall tower on a bed of sand. And the tide came in and the tide went out, and eventually that sand was pretty destabilized. And that's the fall of consciousness. Now, let me keep it in perspective. Everything about the creation into the fall was exciting. Nobody expected a distortion to come about. This was adding to and expanding on in creation. One of the intentions of the fall of consciousness, one of the intentions of this level of understanding physicalness in this level was there are many aspects of Creator. There's the aspect that's known as the Holy Spirit. There's the aspect that's known of the I Am Presence. There's an aspect known as the Christed Light. Those are like arms and legs to you and me, aspects of Creator. And in each one of those aspects, the ability to generate tremendous awareness was constantly part of the expansion of the Creator knowing itself. One of the intentions of that process, as we began to get denser and denser, was to create something in physicalness that was called the atom-cadmium body. And the atom-cadmium body is a 12-dimensional, let's just call it physical consciousness, that was of the light of the Christed vibration of Source, of Creator. And as the density kept getting more and more, the ability to build that was something that all were excited in, because knowing yourself as a Christed being in physicalness was the experiment. But it got to the point where the density got more and more dense, and the mutations began to infiltrate all through the system. And one day, the big building on the House of Sand collapsed. And so I would put this more in the context of, think about a chemistry experiment in a chemistry lab that kind of blew up. Now, and when that happened, they need to seal off the lab so that the fire didn't expand to the entirety of everything, became something of great importance. There was a distortion. Now, let me back up again a little bit, because there are no failures. You see, in creation, everything is created and destroyed and changed and reframed in the context of learning and expanding and knowing new things. Nothing is fixed. Everything has a vibration and is in cycles. So in this particular situation, when that experiment in the chemistry lab kind of blew up, it was like, wow, this is really interesting. But in order to kind of save it, and the reason that they wanted to save it was because many, many, many beings of light were in the chemistry lab. Many of the Ark Angelics, many of the great avatars, many of beings that you can't even name in this process, were all caught up in this experience. And so, but again, using my fire analogy, began to expand quite rapidly. So in order to not have this contamination into all that is unrestricted, there was a series of decisions, according to Metatron, who played a big role in this, is we have to isolate the experience. And so in the process of doing that, today there are, according to Raphael and Youre, there are not only aspects of physicalness that are quarantined, there are whole universes that are quarantined. And in many cases, nothing goes in and nothing comes out. And I'll explain that again in a minute. So, but as the containment was really required, there was a creation, a platonic solid, a geometry, if you would, in physicalness that basically acted like cement. It created such a rigid stability that nothing could get out of this kind of block of cement, if you would. And that was an extremely challenging thing because all these great beings are in there. And one of the things that happened, and this has a relationship to you, is in order for them to, my words, really not go insane, being completely locked into a very rigid physical form and being fully conscious, there was a decision to interrupt that consciousness. And so in relationship to me and you have an awareness of, lots of great beings like Einstein, and they say, well, he used 5% of his brain. When you start to talk to neuroscientists today, they are really clear that we use a very, very small part of our brain, but a very large part of our brain is extremely active. They have no idea what it does. So rather than destroying something, the consciousness, it was as if the wires were all disconnected. And so these great beings basically lost awareness or lost consciousness. They were fully aware. That process happened a long time ago. I mean, like a really long time ago. So, but there's no time. So in this period, here's all these great beings rigidly locked into a particular place without having consciousness of themselves, but being aware of themselves. And one of the things that happened is, according to Youre, is the Ark Angelics, because so many of the angelic realm and the archangelic realm were caught in this experience. Now, we're not just talking about Earth. In fact, we're pretty much talking about a large parsec segment of this galaxy that is quarantined. And in this case, some come in and some go out. But in other places, there's just universes that simply are locked into place. One of the reasons those universes are locked in place is the mutations in those cases began to be mutating in mutation. And so there are places where there is no light of the Creator in creation. And yet there's consciousness and it creates and it works. And so, but no light. And Uriel explained that to me one time, and I thought, wow, how are you going to bring them out of the darkness into the light? And it was really fascinating because all I could feel was this huge smile. And he said, well, they're not the problem. they're actually easy to fix because there's no light in their space. We can handle that. He says the real challenge is you, because you have free will. So in order for you to step out of this fall of consciousness, you have to choose. And then to make it even more impacting, he said the reality of this experience is we know all of the possibilities and all of the probabilities of what is available and what will happen. We know it all. But we did not create the fall. It was created in physicalness, and it has to be undone by you in physicalness. It's you who can unravel the game. It's not us. Very interesting as you kind of go to play in this whole experience. And so in that fallen state, it was locked down for a long period. And in the process of trying to unravel it, to make it experiment, it was actually got kind of exciting for lots of these creator beings, because it's like, wow, something new to play with. And yeah, it was a challenge, but it was something new. Think about how many times you as a little kid would build blocks and build blocks and build blocks, and all of a sudden, you know, if I put one more on, it's going to tumble, and sure enough, it comes crashing down. And in that case, everybody laughs and you put it back together. Well, it's similar. It's like, wow, what do we do with this? So in the process where I said one of the things that happened with the Ark Angelics, they asked for a new job assignment to the creator, according to Youre. And basically they said, we wish to guide those who can unravel this game. Because we have so many of us, that vibration of Ark Angelic, that are locked into the game. And so hence the presence of all these beings and the guidance that they provide. And as an aside, I get to have these conversations with these great beings all the time. That's available to you also. But it's the story. We'll get back to the story. What's your story? What do you believe? How do you construct your story in terms of understanding what's true and what's not true? In your story, you simply accept a tremendous amount of information as truth. And in that accepting of that information, in the rigidness of the structure, it becomes lines of definition that prevent you from looking outside of the truth. Now, in this case, take a look at religions. Now, this has happened a long time ago, and in religions, a lot of the really, really fundamental religions, they have this truth. There's not a lot of wiggle room in that truth. Now, what makes that part of the story really interesting is as this rigidness began to have opportunity for loosening and unwinding, the great creator beings basically started to deconstruct or restructure a new creation that allowed everybody to get out of the fall. Something that occurred is in creation, in an aspect of the Holy Spirit. Creation is created in the Holy Spirit. It's a bigger story than just that. But there's something that allows this to unfold. You and I would define this as masculine energy and feminine energy. Now, we're not talking about physical bodies, and we're not talking about intellectual, emotional, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. What we're talking about when you begin to look at how creation happens, the very first impulse of creation is feminine. And it flows in such a manner as if it's a question with no lines and no angles. Like, I wonder, or how is it possible? Or could we do this? And when you think in those terms, there is no structure. So feminine energy is very much curls and swerves. Whereas masculine energy is the energy that says, I can do that, I can make that, I can build that, I can construct that. Masculine energy has lines and angles. Feminine energy swirls, curves, and motion. And so in that process of the rigidity of the fall of consciousness, as it began to loosen up, there was a need to basically put everybody back together. But in order to do it, it had to be very structured. So an aspect of creation that we would call the mother. Now, we're not talking about a feminine flow of energy, because you have feminine and masculine in you. You're a creator. But this creator being that came into the mix was the mother. And in this case, the mother was very disciplinary. It basically had to keep everything well constructed, well ordered, to ease everybody out of this kind of block of ice, block of cement. And so that easing happened. And in the process of the easing, according to Metatron, there began to be a resentment of the disciplinary mother. And it's as if everybody started to get a little bit of room to move around in that big block of cement, a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of motion. They began to get rewired back together again. And in the process, particularly here on Earth, because Earth plays a big part of this, there began to be a distortion that we would call resentment. And so a lot of anger and a lot of resentment and get me out of here. And I'm bound into this rigid structure, this electromagnetic field. And so the mother was doing the job that had to be done to ease everybody back into a state of balance and well-being. So in that process, as that unfolded, and it unfolded and unfolded, now we're almost in present time. Because one of the things that happened is, and this is where religion comes into being, is as everybody began to remember certain things, that resentment towards the feminine energy, even though it was disciplinary, that resentment towards the feminine began to take hold. And the process of the beings were loosened up, and everybody was finding their little bit of flexibility. But the resentment, the mutation, the distortion began to take hold. And in a masculine, as the structure of creating and waking up and beginning to be whole again, it was the masculine structure of rigid, specific, hard lines, fundamentalism as you know it today. This is how it is, no change, this is the truth, they did it to me, etc., etc. And so as everything loosened up, and it was loosening up in a very progressive way, in this period of time we're in, and so that goes back a long time, tens of thousands of years, that resentment, that male resentment towards the female is what you see playing out. And it's in the rigidness of the fundamental thinking. Now, religion maybe can we point to here, but it's the thinking of the individual. Women aren't okay. Men are the authority, the straight line, the disciplinary, and the rigidness. And so to a great extent, we're unraveling from the fall of consciousness. And it's unraveling very quickly. And you're seeing places all over the world today that are, let's call them progressive, let's call them awakened a little bit more. A part of the world that is still very much in judgment and resistance and in anger and frustration and good and bad and right or wrong, very much the constructs of the box. But there is aspects of so many that are starting to begin to love, begin to enjoy themselves, begin to take a breath, relax a little bit more, begin to remember themselves as the rewiring is occurring. So this fall of consciousness is in its very final stages. And that aspect of growth is unfolding significantly. In the process, that thought of that Adam Kadmon 12th dimensional construction of Christed concept has been expanded dramatically in this learning process of this experiment, gone wrong and then recreated into something even more amazing as it all really unfolds. So we're in a place right now where this unfolding is beginning to take place in some very, very amazing ways. One of the things that's happening is as I've said in Mastering Alchemy forever, is you can't take your baggage with you on this journey. And the baggage is the resentment, the jealousy, the anger, the rage, the good, the bad, the right, the wrong, the very hard masculine lines of this is the truth. This is my story. It's in the this is my story that the opportunity to step back, find a sense of ease, take a breath, and begin to bring yourself into a place of present time, right now, because it's in the right now that you can forget the story. It's in the right now that you can recreate the story. It's in the right now that you get to rewire yourself, recreate yourself, remember yourself. And so as this process is happening, and it's happening very, very rapidly right now, these huge waves of light that are coming in are very expansive and very disruptive. They are basically pushing all of the I'm not okay, I don't deserve, I'm not a good person up to the surface. And so you look around, you see a lot of instability in the world today, fall of consciousness, unraveling itself into something that is going to be not only remembered, but considerably expanded. So right now, if that story can just be a point of reference, it was something that happened to you as a creator being, and not a creator God, but a creator being. You are in the lineage of creator beings. All humanity is part of the creator beings. Some are playing it out in wonderful ways, some are playing it out in not so wonderful ways. That's not important. Creator being. What makes the creator being piece really exciting is as we go forward, there is something that is beginning to happen. You are in the process of remembering yourself. But as you wake up, you're going to begin to recreate yourself. This is where Mastering Alchemy, to me, is so exciting because I'm just a part of something. My job is to communicate what the Ark Angelics and others are presenting and step it down into a place where it is understandable, or more important, it's like, I remember this, and the wires come together. It's in that rewiring of yourself that one thing will happen at some point in time. You begin to turn the brain back on. You begin to change the neuron messaging system in the body. You begin to remember. You begin to alter the cellular structure. But more important, you put that mental and emotional body back together because it was never meant to be two bodies. But in this process of putting you back together, sitting in the heart, there is a flame. And that flame is absolutely quiet, and it is unrecognizable for the most part, playing in third dimension. But when you get quiet and you sit in a place where you maybe sit in nature and you watch the stream and you see the baby fawn of the springtime walking by, there's a feeling. And that feeling is that I wish to know myself. And even though you think you are speaking that, you are the reflection of the Creator, reflecting back to the Creator what the Creator is. And that flame begins to get much larger. And at some point, it begins to ignite a little point in the pineal center, the center of the head. And it's actually like a little pilot light, just small, small, remembering. Small empowering begins to happen. As that light body further gets all put together, there's a place where you begin to remember yourself, and that flame turns on. And that flame is the flame of the creator gods, the creator beings. It's the flame that says, I can create in my own light the creation that the creator wishes to experience. Now, here is an interesting point where some people get very stuck. It's like, wait a minute, was I one of those that created in my own image the last time and created all this problem? In the simplest way, get over it. That's not the case. That's not what's going on. It's that aspect of you that's remembering you and remembering all that is and remembering fully consciousness, being aware, fully aware in consciousness. And so this fall of consciousness is a story. All I'm telling you is a story. But the story is such that it allows a different perspective than the very unconscious foundation story. Fall of consciousness, bad angels, something broke, we're all going to hell. It's not the case. It's not the case. Now, don't believe me when I say it's not the case. What I'm really saying is, here's a point of reference. Consider it. Just begin to look at it. But if you're listening to this story, I will pretty much guarantee you, you're turning on. There's a rewiring going on. There's something that says, oh, that's interesting. I wonder, and you just start to have curiosity in an area that you don't think in curiosity. So this turning on is coming back into place. But what is very fascinating, and I've talked about this in other capacities, things about artificial intelligence and numbers of aspects of this consciousness that we're stepping into. What you're beginning to remember is an aspect of consciousness that is far, far beyond your perception in the moment. Right here, we only know what we know. And given Einstein's 5% of brain being a generous offering, I'm not that smart, so maybe I got 2% going on. What goes on in the other 98%? I mean, think about it. You see a piece of 1/4-inch graph paper, and right in the middle is a little red dot. And then it begins to expand out, and it gets red, starts to bleed into orange, and orange starts to bleed into yellow. Well, when you're out in yellow, you don't really remember red. You moved away from it. But in this case, when you begin to be right in present time, you remember red and orange and yellow and green and blue. Your expansion of awareness is unfolding at an unprecedented rate right now. The brain is rewiring, and it's going to continue to rewire as you begin to remember yourself. So one of the things that's happening right now that is extremely exciting and has a little bit of a distortion to it also, and another part of the story, not to be believed, but to be considered, that all of this artificial intelligence that you see going on at a tremendous rate right now is first and foremost created by what you know inside yourself. See, every little microchip, every invention that has happened, it's because you know it already and you bring it into physicalness for creation. This artificial intelligence, this huge technological evolution that we're watching, it's already inside you. You already know this. Not as the inventor of some new entrepreneurial aspect necessarily, but what you're beginning to do is remember the orange and the yellow in the expansion. And what you're beginning to do is turn that 5% brain onto 7%, maybe 9%. And the expansion is very significant. What you're beginning to do is remember yourself as a fully conscious being. You're beginning to know consciousness as the soul knows consciousness. So if you can look at that huge technological, computational ability and capacity to know things, that's you already beginning to step into that level of remembering, rewiring, realigning who you are. That process is going to happen over the next 10, 15 years. And many won't accept it, and they will really kind of step aside. Many will accept it and begin to know themselves and begin to step into a strata of consciousness that is all about well-being, respect, and dignity. Remembering who I am as a Christed being, as a creator from the mind of the Holy Spirit, a statement of this is who I am, all reflecting back to the Creator what the Creator is in you. That flame is going to begin to burn greater and greater in every one of us. Those that start to choose to step forward. Many won't. Many will simply choose to dig in their heels and continue to push against. So we've said now often there will be kind of really two stratas of consciousness. One strata being those that really like to argue, push and shove, and good, bad, right, wrong, wars, and imposition, and those kind of things. And then those of you who basically say there's a different way. There's a way of well-being. There's a way of thinking from the heart. It's in that decision that this pineal flame begins to ignite. You're going to find that what you think is truth is simply part of the story. And as the story begins to evolve with more pieces and more pieces, much of the fundamental structure of those rigid lines of the fall of consciousness are going to dissipate. It's an awareness. It's something that's in the process. But understanding you aren't, I'm not okay, and are not the rigidness of these lines, and begin to have freedom to choose, as you now have, to let go of those rigidness, let go of your own self-judgments, your own doubts, and begin to kind of play in the stream. Is begin to play. Begin to just be curious. What if I liked myself? Now, in real terms, it's a story that says, "Oh no, I don't like myself. I did bad things, or I embarrassed myself, or my mother didn't love me, or I was not nice to my ex-husband, wife." Yeah, that's all true in some way or another, but that's not your story. That's your circumstance. But when you can stop and get right into this place and get into the flow of this light, you're going to find that the ability to adjust your story that very much holds I like me is really where this is all going. So the fall of consciousness, part of the story, happened really pretty much that way. I'm going to buy into that part of the story from all of my friends, the Ark Angelics, the Lords of Light, the Ascended Masters. But it's only a part of the story. But it's the part of the story that says you can let go. It's not your story anymore. So how do you choose? How do you wish to choose? You're going to watch this. The more you choose into well-being, the one thing that's going to happen is you're going to forget your story. You're going to forget why you felt that way. You're going to forget the underlying belief system that this is how the world works. You're going to find a lot of that is just going to dissolve away as you begin to activate those aspects of the brain, the cellular structures, the rewiring of the consciousness of the heart. So very exciting things happening right now, but it really is time to begin to step back and choose somewhat differently than we have chosen from the rote structuring of how we were told it all happens. So I wanted to have that conversation just to begin to set an energy in place. And so let me come to a and see if that made any sense to you. I'm happy to have some questions if you've got questions, and let's see where I can make some additional sense out of all that. So let me turn this over to Roxanne, who's sitting on the floor over there enjoying herself, and let's see if there's any questions that anybody has.
So, hello everybody, this is Roxanne. If you would like to ask a question, simply type it into the Facebook feed there, and I will copy and paste and ask it as fast as I can. Jim, also let us know if you're a level 1, 2, or 3 person, so Jim can kind of answer the question closer to the tools that you have already. Also, if you're one of the Course in Mastering Alchemy book students, let us know that as well.
And if you don't know anything about what we're talking about, let us know that too, because that's even more enjoyable.
So, Jim, this first question is from Aaron. So, physicalness was created without the light of the creator?
No. Physicalness was one of those great creations. And everybody got excited about physicalness as it came to be. It was created in the light of the creator. It was as some of those beings that played, and be really clear, they're not bad beings. There was no bad guy in this story. There was unbridled enthusiasm that just got carried away in the simplest of terms. But the creation of physicalness was one of the new great creations. And then as everybody played in it, those mutations and distortions started making their way into physicalness. Thanks for that question. That's helpful.
Here's one from Kelly Ann. Are some of the avatars and other great beings still trapped in this plane?
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why, this is the interesting challenge, is the Ark Angelics say, we know all the probabilities and the possibilities. It's you who has to create, dig the shovel, turn the doorknob. You are the ones that unravel all of this.
Here is a question from Fred. I'm in level 3 and we're building the light body. We're beginning to use our light to create. I'm concerned I might miscreate.
No, so I'm going to say don't be concerned. In again, simple terms, mastering alchemy to a great extent is a sandbox. You're playing in the sandbox. You're waking up, you're rewiring yourself, you're remembering yourself, you're becoming more and more aware of yourself, and you're beginning to access consciousness in these multidimensional fields. And so, sandbox, it's really all about partly this story. There were no bad guys. The story is we created without paying attention. Let's call it sloppy. Let's call it we didn't know whoever the we is. So, but stay out of that space of saying I'm afraid, because I've heard it over and over again from many of the people in Mastering Alchemy that was I one of these bad ones? And it's a deep feeling in some people, but it's not an accurate statement, and you're not going to wind up being in places. There's a lot of things that you do in the Mastering Alchemy tools and the experiences where you are putting yourself back together, and it's you doing it. And you could build your blocks pretty much any way, but you're doing this very, very precisely in this process. As I watch, hundreds and hundreds of people having gone through this program, basically being put together well. And now it's time to remember.
Jim, this question is from Deanna. Where did karma come into our creation and why?
Karma is a great concept. And what happens is in that place of the fall, there began to be certain kinds of structures that had to be in place. So, for example, like the 10 Commandments, Neil Donald Walsh did such a brilliant job back in the, 90s with his books about the how the 10 Commandments were misassumptions. But at different times, things like karma were necessary to kind of create a balance and create structure of rigidness that people basically treated as laws. But karma is something in the place where we're all playing is you don't have time for karma anymore. I mean, on an energy level, the karma is just being removed. Now, karma also is, to a great extent, a misconception. it's part of the older belief system of spirituality growing up. But karma is really a direct response to the law of attraction. Law of attraction saying what you put your attention on, the universe will provide for you. So when we get playing in the game of learning how to do things, and we are in guilt, or we're in blame, or we're in words like that, what happens is you start to create these imbalances. And so you punch me in the nose and I get really, really resentful, and I hold on to resentment, and I hold on to resentment. And law of attraction says, boy, you must love this resentment thing. Let me give you more of the same. And so when you begin to understand law of attraction, you have a lot of opportunity to begin to recognize karma is a game that was created that is, for all of you, absolutely an unnecessary game to continue to hold in your head as a truth. It's just simply a configuration of the story. And in that place, if you can begin to recognize, okay, I stole the candy bar, or I cheated on a test, or whatever your story is that story available to you or necessary to you 10 years, 20 years, 30 years later? Do you still want to hang on to that story, that point of attention for the law of attraction to keep feeding you the guilt, the blame, or whatever it may be? So in this case, it's really something to step back and say, how do I wish to experience myself right now? What if you could just erase everything in your story and be very healthy and ask that question? What would I like to experience, and how would I like to experience it? And karma doesn't have any play there at all.
Jim, this one is from Athena. Does the Merkaba play any role in our evolution?
Absolutely.
Good question.
So I was going to talk about this, so let me bring this up. Platonic solids, these different geometries that we know of that are really very perfect geometries. All the angles are the same, all the lines are the same, all the area of the faces are exactly the same, and they all fit inside a sphere with all the points touching the sphere. That's a pretty fascinating set of conditions. And 5, there's actually one more in non-physical space, but 5 meet that definition. And so what makes it really interesting, to a large extent, the fall of consciousness is referred to as Metatron's cube. It's a cube. It was very rigid in that case, but a cube is a cube. It's not a fall of consciousness. It was the structure that was used. When you start to play with the Platonic solids and you start to open up your consciousness, one of the first ones you get to play with is what's called the octahedron. And four-sided pyramid, top, four-sided pyramid on the bottom, that actually fits in your aura. And one of the things that you lost information around is all the energy in your aura. So when you put the octahedron back together, the ability to, it's like an antenna. It just simply connects into all that is, and you start to get smart, or you begin to remember. The next geometry is the star tetrahedron, and that's what most people call the Merkaba. So, but all these geometries are structured in such that they have 2 counter-rotating spherical fields around them, and vibration. There's a vortex. One goes one way, one goes the other way. These geometries are like antennas, and they're also wiring systems for the body. And so that definition of Merkaba applied to the star tetrahedron isn't purely only for the star tetrahedron. Merkaba is a geometry with 2 counter-rotating fields of light that create a balance. Think of a gyroscope creating balance. So, but that star tetrahedron, at this stage of most everybody's development, you all playing and mastering alchemy start to expand that very quickly in level 2. But for the most part, that star tetrahedron is in your space, everybody's space. It's just dormant, not turned on, and not used. When it begins to turn on, it begins to restructure a lot of the wiring in the brain. It begins to change the cellular possibility of the body. So the next piece is, it's as if you turn on this huge computer and it's on, and you sit and stare at it without having any idea what to do with this. So one of the key pieces of mastering alchemy is turning it on and beginning to know what to do with it. It expands from that star tetrahedron into the cube, into the icosahedron, into the dodecahedron. All of them begin to, from that point, bring in multidimensional applications. Really cool.
Jim, this next question is from Jessica, who's in level 1 and is also working through the book. What about the animals? What is their role in the fall of consciousness?
Not so much really anything, except they were physical creations. Now, animals are conscious to us right now. A lot of the animals in a way are a whole, which obviously they are, whole separate groups of species that want to know themselves. So they're all intelligent. They all are aware. They all are in process at certain levels of knowing themselves. It's like going to a big, giant school where you have kindergarten through 12th grade, all happening in the same earth. And but every living thing on the planet is in its own construct of wanting to know itself.
Jim, this one is from Jan. She's also level 1 and going through the book. How can I use the grounding cord when I'm lying down? It feels awkward and not aligned with the rest of my energy field.
Think about the grounding cord as the radius of a circle. And so it's here, and whether you do this or you lay down or you pick your nose, it doesn't matter. It just, boom, you're grounded. So play with it from the standpoint of it stays in that position and you're moving around. So the grounding cord connects into the first chakra, and it just, think about it as you rotate around that part of the grounding cord. I get it feels awkward because you think it should be something, but allow the expansion to come about.
This one's from Fred in the UK. What will happen to those who are not awake or on the MA, Mastering Alchemy path? Will they stay in the 3D noise and drama?
You know, this is an individual choice, and the individual choice is to each individual as a spiritual being having their own experience. And what I mean by that is everybody's got their own story, and everybody comes into a body with purpose and direction and wanting to know itself. So being simple, we create a story, and we come in and we play it out. It doesn't mean that that's the only story, and it doesn't mean that you have to stay rigidly in it. And so as you begin to play in Mastering Alchemy and you get curious, really big word, curious, and you start to realize that some of that story I've been told just simply doesn't make any sense to me. You begin to find that a lot of the story that you have in your past really wasn't even part of your story. It was just something you believed. I had a relationship with somebody that I talked to not too long ago that I knew in high school, and they said, oh, the thing I remember about you the most is the time we walked across in New York, the George Washington Bridge, and you did a handstand on the railing. It was amazing. No, no, that didn't happen at all. And yet this person swears to this day. I mean, 20 years ago, she said this to me, same thing, and I told her the same answer. So we have these stories, we have these beliefs, and to a great extent, they're just a slice of a little flash of light that happened that you go, oh, well, that must mean, and there we are, stuck on, well, this is how it happened. As you get into present time and you start to stay on your side of the rows and you begin to watch the theater, Shakespeare's theater, you all of a sudden realize that, boy, I'm in this motion, this habit, this belief, and this is what I have to do to be accepted by everybody. But in present time, it's like, wow, you bring it in, you bring your whole life right into here, and you'll find that a great part of what you think was important, what you were all about, what happened to you, didn't happen that way at all. And it's very, very freeing.
Jim, this one is from Judy, who's in level 3, first year, MA 37. You mentioned about many of us losing friends in the past and also moving. My question is about family and new friends who are not in a good place. Is there anything I can do for them?
So first, understand you're in a journey. You're moving through this space and you're bumping into new people. You're bumping into different configurations with family. I've said this in that same context all the time. As you begin to know yourself, you start to step up in your perception, your awareness, things that are acceptable and unacceptable. And many of the things that are at that point no longer interesting to you, you don't put attention on. And consequently, some of the old friends fall away because that's where you held your old self. Family is the relationship is the toughest game on the planet, and family is the toughest game of the toughest game. And so the key is, can you be yourself? And that doesn't mean you don't care about anybody, but as you begin to know how to simply respond without beating them up or buying into the story or buying into the sarcastic comment that you always argued with or got really irritated about, because as soon as you get irritated, they just come right back with some more. So consciously managing yourself in family gets interesting because you all of a sudden don't buy into the sarcasm. You just don't agree, or you don't comment, or you kind of walk away. Well, at the beginning of that, sometimes the person throwing the rock gets annoyed because they want to throw rocks. And so they amplify it a little bit. And so paying attention to your role, it's all about you. This is your play. They're your primary actors in your play, playing out their role in your play. So as you begin to navigate away from that game, you'll find that they'll either shift or they'll move kind of out of the way. New people are now coming into the game. Some of them are coming in to just continue to push another set of buttons that you get to clear away. Everybody is your mirror. But as you begin to get more and more comfortable with yourself, you're going to find more people starting now to come into your life that are interesting people to be engaged with.
Okay, here is a question from Albert. How do I start to learn the mastering of alchemy? I'm a Vajrayana Buddhist. Is there any conflict in learning mastering alchemy because karma is part of the teaching in the Buddhist tradition?
Let's say there may be conflict, I say that lightly, from the standpoint of exactly that question. So here's a whole structure. We won't call it Buddhism a religion, but it's a belief system, and part of an old belief system when karma was very much part of that. Part of the earth was still locked into the fall. It simply, like religions or ongoing belief systems, just say, this is truth, this is truth, this is truth, this is truth. It doesn't get examined often. It's just the fundamental truth. Once upon a time, it was the truth. It's not the truth now. So where the conflict might be is hear what is being said in terms of, if you're playing and mastering alchemy, just hear it. Don't believe it, just hear it. And then simply say, does that make any sense to me? And recognize you've got a whole lineage of an old energy level, not bad or good, just an older energy level that may not be in present time. So right now, what makes sense to me? This new piece of information or this old piece of information? Choose. No right answer, just choose. And that way it'll probably begin to make a little bit more sense in terms of growth, or I'm comfortable right in this older belief system.
Jim Bonney is asking, do you feel that artificial intelligence will ultimately use telepathy or more human patterning using data sets?
So it's going to happen in both ways in some aspects, but the question's even too small. So things like telepathy, clairvoyance, clairsentience, two kinds of telepathy, the clairaudience part of you, the transmedium part of you, all that is absolutely available to you right now. in a masterfully way if you choose to pay attention to it. All those things are on, but basically not paid attention to. There's an aspect now where there's a aspect of, in fact, there's a video or a body of information going around in the spiritual community in Europe that is saying, look, here, just put this little microbe in your head or this little processor in your head and it'll turn on all these things. And in a way, it might be right. You know, in a way, it's like take a hallucinogen drug and boy, you really can have a tremendous experience. Sometimes a bad experience. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying a different way of doing something. So, but the microprocessor that they're talking about is not how you already know this. If you turn it on, you can turn it on. So there's going to be an interesting part of the evolution. There will be things like people having chips put into their head or chips put into this or that, and they may have some really incredible experiences. So are you going to become a technology with a biological component, or are you going to become a biology with a technological component that's already there? And so a lot of the Mastering Alchemy work, particularly out in that light body phase at the end of the program, is about turning on these different, your own microprocessors in the head. But the question you pose is a very real one, and there's going to be a lot of push and shove as evolution continues going forward over these number of years.
Jim, this next question is from a Shauna that we used to know in Chico.
Shauna, and now Bend, Oregon. We've come looking for you and never found you.
What's the best tool for bringing yourself into present time?
Is take a breath and literally take a breath and then pull yourself in close to yourself. See, one of the things about the rose is when you get on your side of the rose and you're conscious about being on your side of the rose, you're in present time. Here I am. And so it's really, can I get quiet? Can I simply sit here and take a couple of breaths? Another part, particularly in Mastering Alchemy, we talk about moving from that third layer of thought into the fourth layer of thought, where instead of needing or leaning into something, or I've got to go, and that lean as a feeling, when you get into that fourth layer, it's more of a, yeah, I think I'm going to do this, or I wonder how that works. There's no motion there's no lean, there's no need, there's no wanting. It's curious. I wonder how that happens, but there's no motion. So if you can take a breath and then just kind of be aware of being here, and do it with your eyes open. I'm talking to everybody, because as soon as you start closing your eyes, the brain patterning flips into something very different. It's just so natural because it's happened since your very first breath. But the brain processes differently with your eyes closed. And so then you begin to access memory in a different way. And that's why so many people have such challenge sitting down and meditating and trying to get quiet, because all these thoughts keep popping up. You're coming closer and closer to present time. And as you come closer and closer, here's all this random set of thoughts where they're out in your energy field. So, but just eyes open, get comfortable, get present time, and then be aware of it. Go into nature and be aware. I'm present and I'm aware. Take another breath, and here I am. And just recognize it, validate it. And you're going to find that you can stay there a little bit more often.
Jim, this may be our last question. This is from Yvonne. What's the difference between a creator god and an angelic? Do both have a soul? Which one is part of a human lineage?
Great question. So the creator gods are I mean, one of the definitions, one of the challenges is, even in asking that question, which is really good, we are limited by the belief that everything's physical. We have no concept of what non-physical is. We really have no concept of what multidimensionality is. Now I'm talking about the humanness that's sitting in the chair asking the question. We process everything from how we believe everything works. And so it becomes very, very limiting in terms of what happens. One of the Ark Angelics one time said, physicalness is like a single grain of sand in the universes of sand. One single grain in all it is. And yet we think that grain is all it is. And it's not. So these creator gods, they're not just one step above you. These are huge aspects of non-physicalness that are out there all the time doing what they're doing. We're just this little tiny thing, little grain, little particle that's way over here. And at the same time, as you begin to become aware, there is another interesting aspect of this, which I'm answering the question, is this sense of yourself as an individual is a game in itself. Because in the third, fourth, fifth, sixth dimension, individuality is a thing. It's all about individuality. In the fifth, sixth dimension, you start to get far more connected in multidimensionality, but you still have an opportunity to play in individuality. When you go into the seventh dimension, everything is all that is as one. There is a little tiny sliver, very small sliver of individuality in the seventh dimension. After that, individuality doesn't exist. It's just another creation, individuality. Part of the game of the fall of consciousness was to see what happens with this concept, a new game called separation. Let's pretend that we don't know the creator. And so it was like, whoa, that's new, let's play there. And so that is part of that very rigid, frozen construct of the fall of consciousness, because they had to take everything apart so everybody didn't go crazy, in a manner of speaking. So the creator gods are this huge, something way far away and right at the tip of your nose simultaneously. You are a creator being. All of humanity are creator beings. Now that doesn't mean we're smart or we're knowledgeable or we're capable in this context in some imagined way of wonderfulness. Everybody's creating something all the time. We're always creating. And so in that context, we're that reflection back to the creator. Sometimes you create magic, and that's when you get a lot of attention from the soul and from the higher self. Magic is as simple in this meaning as well-being, happy, gratitude, appreciation, humility. Those vibrations are vibrations of the heart. It's those vibrations that you get the attention of all it is, higher self, soul. You get no attention, no engagement from the higher self or the soul when I'm miserable, depressed, my sex life is bad, they don't like me at work, and I'm getting fat. There's none, zero. It's like the higher self will sit here and just allow you to wallow in that as long as you want. When you get serious and say, I need help, the fact that you can ask that question means you had to step up to here. And there's all kinds of help. But it's like, well, my life sucks and I'm fat. That thing doesn't work. Nobody cares. It's like, okay, you're just over there playing in that game. So as a creator being, as you step into these levels of remembering, rewiring, rebuilding yourself, the natural state in the heart is well-being. I like me. I like me a lot, actually, but I can't like me a lot when I've got all the stories in my space. And I keep saying, well, don't you remember? Or the really simple non-truth that is one to consider for everybody who hasn't heard this before, is your past doesn't exist. It's simply like a book of history. And if you can stay out of the emotion in the moment and look at the book of history without being emotionally engaged in all the things that are there, and then say how much of this is real right now, and if I brought it into present time and had it right in front of me, is it important to me? I'm going to guarantee you that basically 95% of it has nothing to do with you today. Nothing. And those little things you think have to do with you, well, my family and my mother, and I should be taking care of my sister, and family is a real challenge because it's full of glue, and it's full of obligation, it's full of I should and I have to, and I mean, it's so fascinating. Everybody talks family in so many interesting ways, and there are great families. But go to Christmas, go to Thanksgiving. How did you enjoy yourself? There's family. There's your family. Do you like that? And generally, so why do you keep pulling it back into your space over and over? You really don't have an obligation. However, you can be compassionate and engaged and uplifting, but you can't do it from ain't it awful. You can be very powerful from a state of certain, capable, very present, here I am, and I like me. And I can discern when to open my mouth and when not to. I can discern about healing people because I think they need it. There's that adage in the Bible about don't cast your pearls before swine. It's that place where as you get really clear about you, you actually become a very potent provider of well-being. And then sometimes it's an odd thing. You let somebody drop into their deepest, darkest misery and you watch them. You don't help them. And at a certain point, they become so vulnerable where you say, can you have this? Can I help you? Here, I understand they're hiring down the street. And that person gets out of that space and they don't remember who gave them that piece of information, and they go get a job and you see them 3 weeks later. And it's like, hey, I'm really happy. Why? I got a job. They have no idea that you gave them that piece of information. So you give to those that in that moment where they can have what you have to give, to uplift them, to nurture them, to help. But just constantly giving people support when they are a victim and they are in that state of unwilling to do anything. The hardest part about this whole evolution is stepping away. Because if they can't have what you have to give, they're going to bite your hand, or you're going to be sucked into a loop that says, I keep giving and I keep wanting to help them. I want to support them. And they can't have it. They're choosing to stay where they are. Sometimes you have to step back and let them drop a notch and pay attention to when you can be of assistance. That's a tough game. That's a really hard thing, particularly for those who are compassionate, those of you who are clairsentient, you feel the world. Stepping away from somebody in need in a victim role and not giving to them is challenging. And so, but it's a learning process. You can be far more powerful stepping away, watching, and then assisting when there's an opportunity that they can have, rather than holding on to your own miserableness about, gee, I keep trying to fix my mother, and I keep flying back to Texas because I'm sure my father is going to figure this out someday, and or something like that. I wouldn't be laughing at the other person on the other side of the camera right now, but so.
Jim, this will be our last question. This is from
Wait, I thought the last one was the last question.
No,
this
is the last question. This is from Nancy Louise. What's the difference between being lazy versus allowing Source to manifest through you as you allow your ego to sit down and your Source open up?
Okay, so complex, good question, but complex question. So one of the things that happens is this game is 100% about you. 100% about you. It's 100% about giving to you. When you begin to recognize that is what it's all about, it then begins to be also 100% about service to others. Now, when you're in that space of well-being, and see, this is the challenge. I just read an email this morning. Somebody's arguing with, well, why don't I be compassionate? What's wrong with being compassionate? Absolutely, that's the whole game. Being compassionate is a great game. But what happens right here is you have to step back and give to yourself. You have to basically begin to, or I shouldn't back away from have to, it's a consideration. Give to yourself, like yourself, begin to allow yourself to have for yourself. When you have for yourself, then you can give freely lots of things. But when you're trying to fix everybody else, you don't have very much. But in this particular place, when in Mastering Alchemy, the whole focus is, can you step back, not to get away from, not to give up on other people? That's not part of the equation. It's simply, can I like me? Can I build a structure of feeling certain and capable and gracious and very present and discerning how to engage with the world as it presents itself right there in front of me? Discerning, a big word. And then start to choose and notice, how does it feel when I like myself, when I feel strength or solid or I feel capable? As you begin to play in that, you begin to discern more and more. You start to realize a lot of the games that I play are not very significant to play. It's in that place that you begin to raise up into that fifth dimensional state of well-being. It's in that place where you start to recognize how to structure vibration, how to structure frequency, how to use color, how to use sound, how to use electromagnetism to create a vibrational state of being to where you can say hello to other people and be of great assistance. It's in that place where you have that sense of yourself that you're very, very effective. The part about the ego is such that this is a whole body of work in Mastering Alchemy. You see, the ego lives in the first chakra, and the rational mind, it lives in the first chakra. And that most have the belief that, because this is how it's been taught for the last 40 years of my awareness, is the first chakra is about survival of the body. It's not. It's about well-being of the body. But because the first chakra is broken, it's amazing it works as well as it works. It is not meant to be a concave appearance in a geometry. It is a spherical structure of energy, and it's not working that way. So in level 2, there's a point where we reconfigure all the lower 4 chakras. When that first chakra begins to work in well-being and begins to create from well-being, the vibrational field begins to move up into the second chakra. And the second chakra is not so much about sex and emotions and those kind of things as it is about excitement and expanded creativity. So well-being moves up into expansion, and expansion moves up into the third chakra of this huge propulsion of creation. But it's the ego that is wounded in that space. And so when you can begin to bring the rational mind into a place of not doing what you've always done, and you can begin to have well-being as the vibration in the first chakra, the ego starts to get healed. It's you, the soul, and the higher self that heal the ego. And so it's a systematic progression. It's not just, oh, now I got it, I'll fix it. It requires some assembly. But the ego is really, really important to you. It would be like cutting off your legs and then figuring out how you're going to get around. The ego is going to become a very vital part of you as you step into the higher aspects of the fifth dimension. And that's where a lot of you are starting to play right now. So that's what I know. And Roxanne tells me that's the last question.
That's the last question.
Last question, okay. So I wanted to begin to just tell this part of the story, again, as a story, but to create a set of concepts that allow you to perceive something that to a great extent is not even in your awareness. Fall of consciousness is not something you think about every single day, but it is in the fabric of the structuring of who you are. And so when you can bring that into present time and begin to recognize that, just look at not beating up religion, look at the religions and the really rigid fundamental structures of religion. Look at how male energy treats female energy in those really rigid fundamental structures. What you're watching is that aspect of consciousness still working its way out of that rigid false structure, the chemistry lab that's still locked down to some extent. It's like your whole lives in that belief system, and then somebody says you can open the door and you can go out now. And no, it's a lie. You're lying to me. That's not what it is. There was I'll do this. There was a time where I was with one of the archangels a long time ago. I mean, maybe 20 years ago. And they said, come with me. And it was in the sleep space. And it was long. It seemed like it took all night. And we went far, far away. And we wound up in this, I'm going to just call it one of those dark planets, one of those dark fall of consciousness zones where there's almost no light beings at all. And it was cold, and it was kind of like nighttime light, moonlight. And they said, no, just sit here with me. And we sat there, and we sat there. It was like a big rock. And we sat there, and I'm thinking, what are we doing sitting here? He said, just be patient. And we watched, and we watched. And out from under this rock, this thing, and that's all I could call it, was a thing, came, and it almost spit at the archangel, and it said, not you again. And he said, yes, me again. I've come to free you. No, it's a lie. You aren't. You are the devil. I know. And it slithered back under the rock. And I said, wow. He says, I've come for eons of time to bring this out from under there and free it. And it can't have it because it only knows its truth, and it's not willing to believe another story. So very impactful, that trip. And but it's really about the story. And so what's your story? You know, what's your rock? I say that kindly. Where do we hold ourselves hostage to our story? And if you can begin to get into that present time space, and I like me, just enjoy you in present time, just today. Then let tomorrow be today. Don't worry about tomorrow. You can think about what to do tomorrow, but stay here and create tomorrow. And you're going to find that the story is going to change over these next couple of years very rapidly. So hope there's some value in that. I wanted to take a little bit of time and just begin to create a new concept perspective of your story. So with that, I hope this was helpful. Go away, enjoy your day, morning, night, wherever you are. I appreciate you. Blessings.